So, a couple months ago I had begun a playthrough of Ravenloft with the intention of making another gold box video for the channel, meant to release just after my video on Menzoberranzan. Unfortunately, about halfway through the game, I encountered a bug where the whole thing would crash when entering a portal mandatory to progress the game. I spent the better part of a week trying to diagnose the issue, but found no success. Even in my deepest Google searches, it seemed like I was the only person having this problem. I was stuck, and I had to scrap the whole idea for Ravenloft, at least for the time being. All that to say, I was pretty soured on the gold box titles, but I had always intended to have them as a regular occurrence on the channel, especially with the huge collection of them that exist out there. Finally, I've decided to jump back in, and I'm glad that I did. We're going to be playing through one of the true classic dungeon crawlers, probably one of the most influential we've played yet. Join me in discovering Eye of the Beholder, a legend in RPG history and a title that remains strong to this day. Eye of the Beholder released in 1991, developed by Westwood Associates, the same Westwood Associates that would eventually become Westwood Studios, who would go on to produce the sequel to the Eye of the Beholder as well as Lands of Lore, another outstanding example of what dungeon crawlers should be, and the game I did my first ever video on. It's a pretty bad video, but if you like what I do here, give it a watch, and give me a hard time for my audio quality. I'll only be slightly offended. Eye of the Beholder has been re-released several times. Outside its physical release on the PC in 1991, it also made its way to the SNES and Sega CD in 1994. Most interestingly, the game was redeveloped for the Game Boy Advance in 2002. The 2002 version was a completely new development of the game that honestly did quite poorly, but exists as an example of the reach this game had even a decade after release, and a really unique game in general. The idea of porting a dungeon crawler to a console seems like it would be a mess. Doing it on a handheld, even more so. This style of game lends itself so heavily to mouse and keyboard play, I would actually be really interested to play the GBA version, just to see how they finagled the controls. For our playthrough, we'll be using the gold box version of the game, currently being sold by Steam for about $12. And it comes bundled with Eye of the Beholder 2 and 3. An absolutely amazing deal if ever I saw one. The game itself starts out with a meeting between the Lords of Waterdeep, discussing hiring champions to defend the city of Waterdeep from a mysterious threat coming from below. The meeting is being watched, however, through a scrying orb by unknown foes. Meanwhile, we get a frankly beautifully animated scene of the Lord of Waterdeep commissioning our champions to the task of cleansing evil from the city. This is the only cinematic in the game, at least in the original release. But it is just wonderful in both animation quality, as well as giving us all we need to drop into the adventure. It concludes with our party entering the sewers below the city and the entry collapsing behind them, sealing them in. The only way forward is down. There is one more cinematic in the game, but it comes with a bit of a backstory, and I don't want to ruin that here. We will talk about it more in depth during the story part of the video. However, as I have a video format I have arbitrarily tied myself to that I refuse to deviate from, before we talk story, we need to talk gameplay. The gameplay for Eye of the Beholder is similar to that of many other dungeon crawlers in the genre, in that you move through a grid-based map system, controlling a small party of adventurers in their quest to thwart evil. This game is an absolute maze. I would say by design, as most games in this genre are. The game is broken up into several different areas, from the starting sewers, to dwarven ruins, to drow-infested tunnels. These areas tended to be distinct and unique, but there was backtracking throughout, and each area generally had multiple levels. So for example, you might be interested in getting through the drow tunnels, but in that endeavor you would be crossing through multiple levels, weaving back through the dwarven ruins and occasionally finding a shortcut through the mantis-infested nests. On top of this, you'll often find yourself falling into trap pits that can't be climbed back out of, or entering a one-way teleporter, forcing you to figure out a new way to progress forward in a new zone with no sense of where you are. The levels themselves are not laid out in any sort of logical order. Generally just a twisted series of tunnels and rooms with no guiding direction. On top of all of this, the game has a lot of optional content. Even the game manual states that not all doors need to be opened in the completion of your quest. So you could spend a good amount of time trying to progress in one direction, only to find a dead end. I finished the game with 2 or 3 extra keys I literally never found doors for. The absolute cherry on the top of all of this is that the game comes with no mapping whatsoever. That's right, you have miles of tunnels to navigate and nothing to track that progress. You get a compass to give you a general sense of direction, but that's it. Back when I was a kid playing games like this, I recall using a notepad to create little maps of my own. One mercy is that the maps are grid-based, and no diagonal movement made less directions to get lost in. Still, this was not a game for the faint of heart, or for anyone afraid of some memorization. You'll be coming back through the same areas repeatedly while you learn where things are. Lucky for us, we're playing this 33 years later, and the blessed folks that re-released this on Steam did it with a huge quality of life feature included. The All-Seeing Eye is a mod that comes standard with new releases of Eye of the Beholder, and this is essentially a modern-day auto map. As much as I'm generally a purist with a lot of these old games, we will be making use of the map to get through our quest. It's just easier than busting out the graphing paper. It also auto-identifies all the items in the game to help escape the frankly cryptic item descriptions. Outside of navigation, the game runs on a stripped-down version of the 3rd edition D&D rules. You create a party of characters at the game's outset. You get to handcraft a 4-character party. You can make humans, elves, half-elves, dwarves, gnomes, and halflings. You have a bevy of classes to choose from, being able to make a cleric, fighter, mage, paladin, ranger, or thief. Assuming you have a well-balanced party, you'll find yourself scribing scrolls and memorizing spells on your mages, praying for divine assistance on your clerics and paladins, and preparing your frontline melee fighters to support the ranged fighters in the back. Really interestingly here, outside building a party that will be able to effectively traverse the dungeon, it's important to balance the physical layout of your party as well. Only your 2 frontline party members will be able to attack and be attacked in melee. Members in the rear ranks will need to be equipped with ranged weapons such as bows, slings, and darts, or focus on magical ability to buff the party. This makes for some fantastic tactical planning in building your party. You can also move members mid-combat. So if you want, you can keep a party of frontline fighters and have them swap when they're weakened. You also need to keep a close eye on the location you're fighting in. Enemies can come in large groups, and they will flank your party if you aren't careful. The last thing you're going to want is a group of hellhounds attacking your rear flank while your fighters are distracted by a displacer beast in the front. This weirdly specific example certainly didn't happen to me and kill my party. I would never be so careless. In addition to your main party of 4 adventurers, you can recruit more members into your party throughout your journey. Now, you can find a living person and recruit them into your party this way, but a sort of interesting twist is that you can also find corpses in the form of bones in the sewers. If you grab these corpses and take them to a dwarven cleric that is found mid-game, you can actually resurrect them into recruitable members. I thought this was a really neat way to handle adding people into your party that fit with the lore. Like, realistically, why would there just be random dudes underground chomping at the bit to join up in your party? Finding dead that were sent before you, resurrecting them, and having them join up is just such a fitting and unique way to build your party. Outside the tactical choices in party composition and positioning, you have multiple avenues of attack when you do inevitably come into contact with the many enemies on offer. Melee is straightforward. As stated, only your 2 front will actually be able to attack. Physical ranged options are effective. You're able to fire a bow and use other handheld ranged options. The downside to ranged combat is it's limited by the number of arrows or projectiles you have. If you run out, you can no longer damage enemies. The good news is projectiles are recoverable 100% of the time, so you can always recover your arrows. The downside is they need to be manually replaced into your quiver, or in the case of thrown weapons, back into your hands. It is super tedious, but a good payoff for the ability to take down enemies from a safe distance. Spells work like you would expect in a D&D setting. Clerics are mostly going to focus on spells to buff and heal the party, while your mages are going to be focused on dealing damage. Mage spells are great at dealing with stronger enemies at a range, and most of your later spells have an AoE component to make destroying groups easier. Of course, anyone familiar with D&D will know you can only cast so many spells without resting. The good news is resting in Eye of the Beholder is pretty painless. You can set up camp to recover just about anywhere, and I think through my entire playthrough I had my rest interrupted maybe twice. One downside is passing time will mean your party needs to eat. This is an RPG. It would be unrealistic if you didn't eat. The good news is that food is pretty plentiful early game, and late game, when there is some scarcity, you should have the priest spell to create food, so likely it won't be much of a problem. If you do for some reason allow yourself to go unfed, your party members will slowly die until you feed them something. All these great systems mean that we can build a pretty devastating party if we want to. But of course, our enemies play by the same rules we do. They can also cast spells, attack at a range, and, as stated, even flank the party if we get ourselves in a bad spot. On top of this, status effects are a constant threat in this game. Poison is very prevalent early game, and unlike the weak poisons of current-gen RPGs, it is permanent if it can't be cured. Paralysis is also a major threat from the many drow warriors you'll face, with their drow poisons. And late game, even the threat of mental incapacitation from the Illithid Mind Flayers. The story on offer here is pretty thin, but it's absolutely worth going through. So enough about mechanics, let's get into the game. The game picks up after our opening cinematic. With our band of adventurers blocked into the sewers, help out of reach, we have no choice but to venture deeper. Before stepping off, let's introduce the party we'll be adventuring with. First we have Puent, a dwarven fighter. He will be our frontline tank and primary melee combatant. Next, Cordio, a fighter cleric that will share a melee slot with Puent until we can find someone better suited to the role. In our first rear slot, we have the genre-necessary thief. Her name is Eye Patch, due to the eye patch she wears. As you can see, I am a very clever person. She'll be our range DPS and lockpicker. Though, to be honest, I think she picked 2 locks in my entire game, as there's such a limited number of lockpicks to be found throughout the journey. Our final spot will be filled with our friendly neighborhood mage, Harkle. He'll be doing magic things for us. I challenge anyone to tell me the origins of the names of my characters. They're all from Forgotten Realms with the exception of Eye Patch. Eye Patch is my original creation. As much as I usually dislike sewer levels in games, especially as an opening act, this level does a great job teaching us how things work. The enemies are mostly weak packs of kobolds and giant leeches, and undead creatures on the lower levels. We find a good selection of traps, puzzles, and keys here. We find illusory walls, teleporters, and we discover that some doors are best left sealed. Reviewing my footage of this section, I am devastated to see that I left behind a pile of bones. These could have been resurrected later to add a member to my party, and I just left them to rot in the sludge. I'm now 2 for 2 in missing potential early game allies in my gold box adventures, after missing the Centaur Warrior in Menzoberranzan. Tragic. The sewers end with an assault by some mace-wielding Flynns and a gem puzzle. Time to leave the sewers behind for a D&D staple, some dwarven ruins. Coming into this level, I was a bit confused. There was some ambient noise I couldn't quite place what it was. It sort of sounds like a Geiger counter. Walking through the door, we are immediately sealed in. And much to my horror, we see some freshly made spider webs and something moving behind them. Puent decides to cut through the webs, and we are face to face with our first giant spider. I absolutely hate spiders. This is going to be a rough section. This whole top level is infested with the things, and I quickly learned 2 big lessons here. First is that ranged attacks are my friend. These spiders poison, and any attempt to fight in melee is almost certainly going to lead to my frontline fighters being infected with venom. This is a doubly critical problem as I have no means to cure the poison at this low level. My cleric will learn to heal it later, and there's even some potions of cure poison in the game, but for now the goal is to avoid those spider fangs at all costs. My second lesson in this area is that monsters respawn, and they respawn fast. I had initially thought I could very carefully pick away at the spider's numbers and give myself a safe place to explore, but that is just not the case. These guys just keep spawning, so we need to move. We make our way out of the spider's nest and now find ourselves in the nest of the Kenku. These are avian magic-wielding humanoids who, according to the manual, take perverse pleasure in annoying and inconveniencing human and demi-human races. So they're assholes. Got it. They luckily don't have the poison abilities of the spiders from earlier, but they are able to cast magic missile. The difficulty here is that the game does a short pause to animate spells when they're cast, so when a group of these guys start chain casting Magic Missile, it can essentially stunlock your entire party, as you can't take action while they're casting. More than once I got caught in a casting loop and had to retreat to heal up. Before finishing this level, we find a dark-robed figure. He dumps on us about Xanathar, the beholder behind all the evils going on under Waterdeep. Apparently Xanathar wants to conquer the city. He also tells us of the Wand of Sylvius, a magic item necessary to vanquish the beholder. Despite giving us all this great information, he himself wants to conquer Xanathar and take over the city in the beholder's stead, and can't risk us getting in the way, so he promptly attacks. He has a few powerful spells, but it's 4 versus 1 and we kill him pretty quick. I don't know how this guy thought he was going to kill Xanathar and conquer all of Waterdeep by himself. Anyhow, the floor ends with a stairwell into the drow-occupied tunnels below, and this is the perfect time to mention how I messed up the entire sequence of events in this game. See, in the Dwarven Ruins, there's actually an entire clan of dwarves. They can give quests in a limited degree, give you your first access to level teleporters, and even offer healing and resurrection services. Unfortunately for me, I was too busy scrambling to escape the spiders, and I totally missed their settlement. This is more a detriment to me, and adds some weirdness in how the story progresses, but overall isn't a huge deal. We will end up returning here later to meet them as we should have. Anyhow, entering the drow tunnels, we're immediately set upon by a drow patrol. They call us a mean name, and we're given the option to fight or bribe the drow. I might have played nice, but no one calls me trollbait and lives. We send them into the abyss, and about 30 more of their friends throughout the level as well. Drow aren't too tough compared to the spiders in Kenku, they just tend to paralyze your front rank, so you need to rely on the rear to deal damage. If only I'd gone to the Dwarven settlement in the correct order, I might have had some additional rear fighters. This area is easily one of the more difficult to navigate in the game, made in no small part worse by me not realizing most of the spider doors have a secret switch on the sides of them. I had just assumed they were all locked and walked past. Ironically, for all the wandering and getting lost I did here, usually in search of keys to move forward, when I did finally progress to the next area, I had multiple spare keys. No idea how I did that. The lower levels of Drowland also have displacer beasts. There isn't really much to talk about here, but displacer beasts are probably my favorite Dungeons & Dragons creature, so I wanted to shout them out. They are big blue cats with tentacles. Pretty boss. Anyhow, we eventually trip into a hole that leads to the mantis nest. This area is very green. Not my favorite place setting-wise, but it's also much shorter than the previous sections. We kill some bugs and eventually find a drow, Shindia. She immediately surrenders to us and gives a big exposition dump. Xanathar, the Beholder, has kidnapped Prince Kiergar to start a civil war between the drow and dwarves to weaken both sides, giving himself reign over the area. Additionally, she poisoned the king of the dwarves, and the only cure is found on the level below. We would have already known most of this information if we had gone the intended path and met the dwarves first, but oh well. Cool to see that making that sort of mistake doesn't totally break the scripting of the game. She disappears in a flash of lights, and we find the imprisoned Prince Kiergar in the next room. We cut him loose and finally add a new member to our party. I spent the next long while exploring the Mantis and Drow tunnels. To the point I was lost as hell and I just did not know what to do. Up to this point, I'd been building a collection of these weird glowing stone artifacts the entire game, and I had no idea what they were for. I had also been passing these stone-blocked doors my entire journey and had no clue what those were for. Turns out, the stone items go into the stone doors, and depending on the item you use, they'll teleport you to entirely different areas. Well, feeling thoroughly like an idiot, we do eventually come to understand the puzzle of the portals and finally find the dwarven settlement, about 4 hours later than I should have. The dwarf we converse with is Armin, and he hilariously begs us to find the lost Prince Kiergar. Kiergar is literally at the front of the party. Like, you're talking to him, man. It even goes so far that he gives us another dwarven warrior to help us in the search. It's very humorous. Anyway, talking to him a second time fixes the scripting, and he gives us a bunch of food and a new stone relic to allow us to teleport to new areas. We use the new stone relic, and it leads us to the next big area. Sadly, this area reuses the texture from the Mantis lair, but the enemies on offer here are Illithid and Zorn, big rock elementals. The Zorn are no problem, but the Illithid are deadly, able to stun your entire party, and worst of all, they can respawn. I found a good trick here to deal with them was to lure them into an empty room and close the door so they can't escape. For all their big brain psychic magic, they can't work a simple door apparently. The real reason this solution is so great is that they won't respawn if you leave one alive locked in a room. Anyhow, we find the portal to Xanathar's lair here, but also find the cure for the Dwarf King. So first thing, we're gonna go wake him from his poison sleep. He thanks us with the Wand of Sylvius, the weapon capable of defeating Xanathar we learned of earlier. Good stuff. Oh, I also replaced my young Dwarven warrior tag-along with a mage we resurrected from some bones. As much as that dwarf seemed like a cool dude, I just think having a second mage will be more helpful. On to the final chapter of this journey. Entering Xanathar's lair, the place is very opulent and just packed to the brim with traps. The main enemy on offer here are stone golems. They're high HP and can hit hard, but have no status effects and generally prove little threat. The AC on my frontline fighters is so high that I rarely take hits anyway. This whole floor is packed with traps and tricks, but is mercifully short and much less of a maze than the prior floors. At the end of it all, we stand face to face with the beholder Xanathar himself. We can either attack or surrender. I chose surrender just out of curiosity, and it makes you drop a bunch of your stuff and fight him anyway. So attack is definitely the way to go. Xanathar himself is an absolute beast of a fight. He hits super hard with magic, and he targets everyone, so it's a challenge keeping your whole party alive. The strategy here is to use the wand to push Xanathar back. You need to get him around a corner and down the hall. This is actually super tough, as he'll be blasting you with Kamehameha waves the entire time, and only magic wielders can use the wand, so you'll be struggling to keep your mage alive while making this slow trip down the hall. Your diligence will be rewarded, however, as when he reaches the end of the hall, you can push him into a spike trap and get to witness what is probably one of the best death animations in any game I've ever played. I have no idea why a little glass window drops down like he's some sort of art piece, but it is badass nonetheless. And that's it. In this version of the game, there's no cutscene. You get a wall of text stating that the Lords of Waterdeep teleport you out and give you a hero's welcome back to the city, and then the game just dumps you into DOS. It's a little anticlimactic, and actually was a major point of complaint when the game first launched. It was so contentious that in the Amiga release of the game that came later, they added a short cinematic that pretty well shows what the text ending described. Either way, our quest is complete and Xanathar is dead. Time for our party to get some well-deserved rest. Let's do a couple reviews to top off this dungeon crawling experience. See what the masses thought of Eye of the Beholder. From Steam. Clunky, slow, and confusing. This review is 100% accurate. I think they pressed the wrong button though. This should be a positive. I'll fix it. There. Perfect. Another one here from GOG. It says that I have the game, but I have no idea where to download it. Okay, so obviously this isn't a real review that I want to critique. It did make me laugh though. I can't figure out how the GOG launcher works, so I'm gonna rate this game badly. Truthfully, I couldn't find any particularly compelling negative reviews on this one that were anything outside old game, runs bad on new system, and I think we're beating a dead horse with that one at this point. I still wanted to include the segment though. I'm a stickler for my own self-imposed structure of the video. I do hope that guy found his game. Eye of the Beholder was not the first dungeon crawler, but it was certainly early and was considered a mainstream success at the time. Going back to play now, I can certainly see why it's so fondly remembered. Graphically, it has all that charm that I've come to expect from a dungeon crawler of the time. The sounds are chunky, and while there isn't much in the way of musical accompaniment, I must admit the silence of it all sort of grew on me as the experience drew on. Exploring a deep, dark cave full of spiders, only able to hear the faintest sound of their footsteps and your own, did certainly create an atmosphere. Often an unsettling atmosphere, steeped with dread, but an atmosphere nonetheless. In terms of gameplay, there will be a learning curve for those new to the Gold Box games, but it's not insurmountable, and the manual is mercifully not too long if you need some tips on the basics. If you really need help, the clue book even comes packaged in with this thing, though I didn't find a need for it myself. Even compared to newer games made on the engine, like Menzoberranzan, it shines in terms of graphics and gameplay, and honestly has the most intuitive inventory of the bunch. The story was super bare bones, but again, remember this experience was supposed to mimic the feeling of getting together to do a Dungeons & Dragons dungeon crawl. Going into the caverns below Waterdeep to discover a lost dwarven empire, destroy some mythical beasts, and ultimately vanquish an evil beholder is the stuff of Dungeons & Dragons legend. Do yourself a favor and give this one a go. You won't regret it. Just remember to bring a cleric. See you in the next video.